The city never truly slept, it only hummed in quieter tones. Even at 3 a.m., the streetlights burned with a cold, honeyed glow, and the air trembled with the soft whir of distant trains and restless engines. Beneath the neon haze, Adrian walked aimlessly, hands deep in his coat pockets, eyes unfocused, mind caught between memory and exhaustion. He wasn't sure when the insomnia began. Maybe the night he left, or maybe the night she did. It didn't matter now. Time had blurred into one long stretch of sleepless wandering, filled with echoes that refused to fade. He used to think the city was alive, pulsing, breathing, shifting with purpose. But lately, it felt hollow, like a body moving after its soul had slipped away. The walls still whispered, but not to him. He stopped near an old cafe. Its windows were fogged from the inside, lights low, jazz humming faintly through the glass. He had been there before, hundreds of nights ago, when her laughter filled the small space like sunlight in a bottle. Alara. The name still felt dangerous to think about. He hadn't seen her in 3 years. Not since the night by the bridge, when everything fell apart with a few wrong words and a silence that stretched too long. Adrian stood there, heart unsteady, watching the faint shadow of someone inside wiping down tables. It wasn't her, of course, but something in the movement, gentle, rhythmic, pulled him back into memory point 3 years ago. The same cafe had been their world, the first time they met. It was raining so hard that the world seemed to blur. He ducked inside to escape the storm, shaking off water, hair plastered to his forehead. She had been sitting by the window, sketching something on a napkin with a cheap pen. Rough night? She'd asked, glancing up without really looking at him. Rough week, he'd replied. Breathless, unsure why he'd answered honestly. She smiled then, not wide, but enough to shift something in the room. Coffee helps, she said, sliding her cup toward him. Even if it's terrible. That night turned into a pattern. They would meet there, almost by accident, almost by design. Two people orbiting the same small space until gravity took over. She was an artist without an audience, painting her own world on canvases too large for her tiny apartment. He was a writer who hadn't written in months, afraid of what words might reveal. Together, they found something that felt almost like healing. Almost, because the city never stopped moving, and neither did they. Now, standing outside that same cafe, Adrian felt time fold in on itself. He pressed a hand to the glass. It was cold. Inside, everything was the same, and yet completely different. He could almost hear her voice again, soft and teasing. You always look like you're about to apologize for something you haven't done yet. He smiled faintly at the memory. Across the street, a train howled in the distance. And rain began to fall, sudden, cold, insistent. The kind that didn't ask for permission. Adrian didn't move. He let it soak through his coat, through his skin, through everything. Maybe this was what he deserved, to keep walking through ghosts, pretending they weren't real. Later that night, he found himself on the bridge. The same one. The one where everything had ended. It looked different now. Cleaner, brighter. But he remembered the cracks in the concrete, the way the streetlight flickered, the sound of the river below swallowing the last of their words. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd stayed? She'd asked that night. Stayed where? Here. With each other. With everything that was still left. He hadn't answered then. Couldn't. The silence had stretched until it broke them both. Now he stood there again, alone, staring at the reflection of city lights trembling on the water. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Unknown numbered. He hesitated, then answered. Adrian? The voice was faint, fragile. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. Alara? A pause. The sound of traffic, maybe a train passing. Then, I thought, maybe it was time to stop pretending we don't exist. The next day, they met in the same cafe. She was already there when he arrived. Hair shorter now, eyes quieter, smile still the same but slower to appear. Time had softened her, or maybe just changed the way she carried her pain. You look, he started, then stopped. Older, she said, with a small laugh. Human, he said. She looked at him for a long time, then nodded. They sat by the window again. The rain hadn't stopped since last night, and the world outside looked like watercolor bleeding into gray. Neither of them spoke for a while. The air between them was filled with all the words they hadn't said, all the apologies that had come too late. I kept thinking I'd run into you, she said finally. Every time I passed this place, I half expected you to be here. I was, he said quietly. Too many times. She smiled, but her eyes didn't. Then why didn't you come in? I didn't think I was allowed to. The silence that followed wasn't heavy, just fragile, like a glass about to break, not because of force, but because it had been held too long. They talked until the lights dimmed and the cafe emptied. She told him about her art, how she'd started showing her work again, small galleries, nothing big. He told her he'd tried writing again, but everything came out sounding like a letter to someone who would never read it. Maybe that's what it's supposed to be, she said softly. Letters to ghosts. He looked at her. Are we ghosts now? She tilted her head. Maybe, but at least we're haunting the same places. When they finally stepped outside, the rain had stopped. The air was clear, the city glowing like a promise that might still be kept. He walked her to the edge of the bridge. Neither said goodbye. Some things didn't need to be said. That night, Adrian couldn't sleep again. But this time, it felt different. The ache was still there, but it was warmer somehow, less of a wound, more of a scar. He opened his notebook, the one he hadn't touched in months, and began to write. Not about endings, not about loss, but about finding pieces of yourself in someone else and learning to let them go. The words came easily, and somewhere, in another part of the city, Alara was painting again, a bridge under rain, two silhouettes fading into light. The days after that meeting passed in a blur. Adrian found himself retracing paths he thought he'd forgotten. The old streets, the corners where the light always hit a certain way, the places where silence once meant comfort instead of absence. He started writing again, really writing. Pages filled with fragments of thought, dialogue, memories that refused to fade. And though he told himself the words weren't about her, every sentence carried her shape into shadows. The city felt different, too. Not brighter, but more real, as if he was finally seeing it again after years of walking through its ghostly outline. The small details returned to him. The smell of coffee roasting from the corner shop, the chatter of morning traffic, the hum of life behind closed windows. He had forgotten that the city was still alive. He had forgotten that he was, too. Alara called him a week later. No preamble, no small talk. Just, can you meet me? He didn't ask where. Somehow, he already knew. When he arrived, she was standing by the bridge again, leaning against the railing, her sketchbook tucked under one arm. The sun was setting, painting the water below with strokes of gold and blood orange. You came, she said softly. I always do. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. I've been thinking, she said, about that night, about how everything we said, or didn't say, let us hear. He stepped closer, feeling the pull between them, the gravity that time hadn't undone. I think about it too, he admitted. Every day. She turned toward the river. Do you ever feel like we're still stuck there? Like part of us never left that night? He didn't answer at first. The wind carried the scent of rain again, faint and electric. Maybe, he said finally. But maybe that's not such a bad thing. Maybe we're supposed to return until we learn something we missed. Alara exhaled, closing her eyes for a moment. Or until we break for good. They sat on the steps beneath the bridge, watching the water ripple below. A group of cyclists passed by, laughter echoing briefly before fading into the hum of the city. Alara flipped through her sketchbook, stopping on a half-finished piece, two figures standing on opposite sides of a river. I can never finish it, she murmured. Every time I try, something feels wrong, like the story shouldn't end yet. Adrian looked at the page, his heart twisting. Maybe it's not supposed to. She closed the sketchbook. Then what are we supposed to do with it? Maybe just keep living inside it, he said. For a while, neither spoke. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was full of all the things they couldn't quite name. When the first drops of rain began to fall, she didn't move. Neither did he. Over the following weeks, their paths began to cross again, at first by chance, then by choice at a late-night walk through old streets. A shared coffee when the city was still half asleep. A quiet moment in a bookstore where time seemed to pause. Each meeting chipped away at the distance that had grown between them, but neither dared to call it anything yet. There was a strange safety in the uncertainty, as though naming it might ruin whatever fragile thing they were rebuilding. One evening, she invited him to her apartment, a small studio on the top floor of a building that leaned just enough to make the floorboards creak. The walls were covered in canvases, Bridges, cityscapes, rain, reflections that he stood there, breath caught. They're all us, he said quietly. Alara looked at him from across the room. You say that like it's a bad thing. It's not, he said. It's just unfinished. She offered that he nodded. She smiled faintly. Then we're the same. As the night deepened, they talked about everything. The years apart, the people they'd become, the dreams that had survived and the ones that hadn't. She told him about the exhibit she'd been offered, a chance to showcase her work in another city. He told her about a publisher who had reached out about his writing. They laughed at how both opportunities had arrived at the same time, almost cruelly so. So, she said, resting her head on her knees. What are you going to do? I don't know, he said. You? I don't know either. They both laughed, the kind of laughter that carries the sound of fear beneath it. Days became weeks. The air grew colder. The rain came more often, and with it, the unspoken truth that hovered between them, that whatever this was, it couldn't last forever. One night, as they walked home together, Alara stopped suddenly in the middle of the street. The lamps cast a pale glow over her face, and he could see the war inside her eyes. Adrian, she said softly, what are we doing? He swallowed, trying not to lose each other again. Is that what this is? He hesitated. What else could it be? She looked down, her voice breaking just slightly. Maybe it's just another way of saying goodbye. The words cut deeper than he expected. I don't want to say goodbye, he whispered. Neither do I, she said. But maybe wanting isn't enough anymore. The next morning, she was gone. No message. No note. Just a single painting left on his doorstep. A bridge under twilight, empty. Except for a shadow standing alone at the railing. He stared at it for a long time, feeling everything collapse quietly inside him. He called her. Once, twice, a dozen times. No answer. Days passed. Then a week. Then two. Until one night, he found her name in an article online. Local artist Alara Voss to debut solo exhibit in Berlin. He read the headline over and over. The words blurring together. He went to the bridge again. It was raining, harder this time, as if the sky was trying to erase everything below. He stood there until his coat clung to his body, until his hands went numb. A couple passed by, laughing under an umbrella. The sound was distant, unreal. For the first time, he didn't think of chasing her, didn't think of waiting for a call. He just stood there, because maybe this was what it meant to love someone, to let them go toward the life they were meant to have, even if it no longer included you. He took out his notebook and began to write again, his handwriting trembling from the rain. He wrote about bridges and distance and the sound of footsteps fading into forever. And as he wrote, he realized something he hadn't before. That love wasn't a single story. It was a city, sprawling, endless, filled with streets that sometimes led back to where you began, and sometimes didn't. He smiled through the rain. For the first time in years, the ache inside him felt like peace. The city had fallen into a strange rhythm since the storm, one that balanced uneasily between silence and chaos. Lights flickered intermittently, generators hummed behind boarded-up shops, and the once busy streets now seemed like the veins of a dying organism, pulsing weakly, struggling to stay alive. Lena walked through the alley with her hood drawn, her shoes splashing through shallow puddles that reflected fractured neon signs. The message she'd found in Noah's old journal still haunted her, a line scribbled in haste, barely legible. The truth isn't buried. It's alive. She didn't know what it meant, but she knew where to go next. The abandoned train yard on the east side of the city. It was the last place Noah had been seen before disappearing completely. The wind howled through rusted freight cars as she entered the yard. A metallic clang echoed, and she froze, scanning the darkness. The air smelled of oil and rain, heavy with decay. She lifted her flashlight. The beam trembled in her hand and caught sight of a mural across one of the cars. It was the symbol again, the same one she'd seen painted near the harbor ruins and carved into the wall of Noah's apartment. A circle, split by a lightning bolt, half red, half black. Beneath it were three words written in faint white paint. We are returning. Lena's breath quickened. She moved closer, running her hand across the cold surface. Her fingers brushed something metallic, a latch. She pulled it, and the freight door screeched open. Inside was darkness, except for a faint glow coming from the far corner. She stepped in slowly, her boots crunching over broken glass and rust flakes. The glow came from an old monitor flickering to life. Lines of code danced across the screen, and then a familiar voice filled the car. "Noah?" She whispered. "Lena." The voice said, static breaking between syllables. "If you're hearing this, it means you've come too far to stop." Her throat tightened. "Where are you?" "The city's waking up," Noah continued. "They thought the experiment failed, but it didn't. It changed us, changed everything. The storm wasn't natural. It was a reset." The screen crackled violently, images flashing too quickly to process. Figures in lab coats, a submerged chamber, symbols glowing beneath water, and then Lena herself, standing exactly where she was now. Her heart pounded. "What is this?" The voice grew distorted. "They're listening. You have to." Then silence. The monitor shut off. Lena stumbled backward, her pulse racing. For a moment, she thought she heard footsteps behind her, soft but deliberate. She turned. Nothing. Only the echo of dripping rainwater. She stepped outside, breathing hard. The storm clouds above had shifted, revealing a dim, amber moon. The air felt charged again, the same electricity she'd felt the night everything began. She started toward the main street when she saw them, silhouettes standing among the cars. 3 of them, their faces hidden behind dark visors, faint red light pulsing from their chests. "Lena Ward," one of them said, voice filtered through a modulated speaker. "You've accessed restricted data." Her mind raced. "Who are you?" "The custodians," the figure replied. "We maintain balance." "You weren't supposed to remember." Lena took a step back. "Remember what?" "Your part in the experiment." Something in her chest tightened, a buried image flickering in her mind. Bright lights, cold metal, and her own reflection in a glass chamber. Her breath hitched. "No." They advanced slowly. "Come with us, Lena. You'll understand soon." But she ran. Her boots splashed through puddles as she darted between the cars, the sound of pursuit closing behind her. One of the visors flashed red, and a blinding pulse of light shot past her, scorching the ground. She ducked into another car, crawling through a hole in the floor, emerging on the far side. She sprinted through the fence and into the empty streets, lungs burning. The neon signs blurred past her. Motel, Pharmalab, SecureTech. The same corporations that had funded the experiment Noah had uncovered. Her thoughts spiraled. If I was part of it, then what did they do to me? She reached the bridge overlooking the flooded river. Below, fragments of the city's reflection shimmered in the dark water. And there, a shape. A figure watching her from the opposite bank. It was Noah. Her heart stopped. "Noah," she shouted. He didn't move. Just stared. Then, without a word, he turned and disappeared into the mist. She didn't hesitate. She ran across the bridge, ignoring the tremors in her legs. But halfway through, a low hum filled the air. Lights beneath the bridge flared to life, forming that same circular symbol in the water below. Her surroundings distorted. The air shimmered, and suddenly, everything went silent, completely silent. Not even her footsteps echoed. Then a voice, not Noah's this time, deeper, colder. The storm was not the beginning. It was the consequence. She spun around. The custodian stood at the end of the bridge, unmoving. "You were designed to forget," the voice continued. "But the cycle is breaking. He woke you." Lena's pulse roared in her ears. "Why me?" "Because you were the key. And now, it's too late to unmake what's been started." A blinding flash consumed everything. When she opened her eyes, she was standing in a room made of glass, walls transparent, with waves crashing outside. The world beyond was submerged. She floated slightly, gravity weak, her reflection splitting into dozens of fragments around her. A figure approached. Noah again, but not the same. His eyes glowed faintly, his expression calm but unreadable. "You understand now," he said softly. "They didn't destroy the city. They moved it, rebuilt it under the surface. Every storm was a pulse, a signal to wake the next generation." Lena shook her head. "This can't be real." "It is. We became something new, Lena. They called it evolution. I called it survival." He reached out a hand. "Come with me. You don't have to fight it anymore." She hesitated. Through the glass, she saw flashes of the surface world, the ruined streets, the rain, the people still struggling above. She thought of her father's words, of the promise she'd made to Noah before everything fell apart. Never stop looking for the truth. Lena looked back at him. If we stop fighting, we lose who we are. Noah's face softened, almost sad. Then you already know what comes next. The glass began to crack. Light poured through, dazzling, golden, unstoppable. Lena closed her eyes as the chamber exploded into brilliance. When she opened them again, she was standing on the bridge. The city below glowed faintly alive. The sky had cleared, and for the first time in years, dawn painted the skyline in soft hues of red and gold. She whispered, almost to herself, "The truth isn't buried. It's alive." And somewhere, deep beneath the waves, a faint pulse of light answered her. Slow, steady, eternal.